Here is a video series showing the essence of tilt casting. It was kindly prepared for me by small CNC lathes. To the left up at an angle we have the die. To the right attached to it we have a pouring basin nicely full of our hot molten metal. The idea is that the metal is just sitting on its meniscus, just entering the die. We now tilt the die backwards and the metal will enter it as a calm, quiet, non-turbulent rolling front. Now let's see this actually happen. The rate at which the die tips back is varied according to the casting. Typically it's slower for big castings and quicker for thinner, smaller work. It may even be varied throughout the actual tilt, being typically perhaps quicker at the end and the start and slower in the middle. CNC controlled servos or steppers could easily be used to do this variable sort of tilt.
This is the next level of less easy, I guess. It's a little tilt casting machine, and this is basically how it operates. You ladle the metal into here. This is a ceramic basin, and then trip the lever here and the die tips back and the metal is poured in to the casting. And if you do this nicely, it does make it quite a nice casting. The two top bits of the die here are held on with a couple of clamps, over centre clamps as usual. And after you pour it, you just pull the clamps back and you pull the casting out. And this, whoops a daisy, there we go, just what we didn't need. This makes this little thing, it's a little support block, and I used to make a lot of these, starting with this size, going up through that size, all the way to this size, and this is half the die, which sort of fitted another machine obviously. This particular die we water cooled. I passed water through the bottom here, just a very small amount of water, and that made it work a lot better. These machines are not really that complicated. A couple of T-stands here with a couple of crude bushes, a hydraulic cylinder here that's quick acting in this direction but slow acting in the other, and I've got a tap here that I can control the rate at which the die tilts. And they work quite well, in fact, and I used to run two of these machines side by side while I made a full range of these. Unfortunately now the Chinese have cut us to ribbons and we can't make those at their rate. But this machine was simply made out of whatever I had lying around at the time, and I've done an awful lot of work with these machines. I've even managed to, I'll just move this out of the way a little and pick it up and get rid of it. Come back. Little weighty. Taking an old one of the dies to make one of the support blocks, I've just machined it out and put an insert in and put a core in the bottom to make these a blank for a bush for the suspension on a four-wheel drive, and I can take that insert out and put that insert in and make a bigger one. And there's a core in the bottom that we pull out with a slide hammer. These incidentally are in a zinc alloy, commonly known as Ilsro 12 or ZA12 or Zamac 12. It's a useful sand and gravity die casting alloy that has many of the properties of zinc-based die casting alloys, and it's quite nice material for pushers and bearings. Here's a slightly bigger version of the same machine. In this case it's got quite a large cast iron die in. Swing her up, lock her in place, pour the metal in there, tip her back. And bingo, one casting's made with a bit of luck. And in this particular case, there's the die actually hinges. If I can get these little clamps, see the die hinges open. And there's a little ejector pin down here that you can just pop the casting out with, and it just makes a tapered wedge. I think it was a camber taper adjustment on older model MGs. We made one run of them and that's it. But again, it's just the same old pour the metal in technique, trip the lever, it slowly tips the metal into the die, and there we go. Using that machine, I did a run of these. They're wedges for working with firewood and the like, and sawing timber. There's one wedge to a narrow one to open up gaps when you get your saw jammed, and there's a wider wedge for tipping logs over, tipping trees over when you've half sawn them down. They're made out of an aluminium alloy that doesn't have any silicon in it. It's non-abrasive therefore, and you can hit it with your chainsaw blade, and it won't do your blade any damage. And I made a few of those, not a lot, but a few. And they were done again in the tilt machines with this die. And it was just mounted the same way with the tilt basin up the top here. Now what else have we got? Right. There is this die, and there is a video on this one. Making these blanking prisms. Excuse me. Oops, right way up. And I'll leave a link to that video in the description down below. Works much better when it's in the machine. But it's the same thing, mounted in the machine and tilts back. Tips the metal into the two little cavities. I made quite a few of those too, and as I say, there is a full video of that so you can see it quite easily. Right, first for the day, as they say. Let's see if we can get anything apart here. Yes. Yes. That's quite a sweet looking little casting. I'm quite happy with that one. Okay. A little liquid there, solid enough now I think to get them out. Close her up again. Here's the morning's work. I think I wound up getting 160 of them because there's 8 rows of 20. According to me, that's 160. All that I had to do following the casting was to cut the feeders off the back and then linish the back where the feeder was removed from. The next little job is to throw them in the box. Now, here's another little one that we did. It makes this. It's in that ESDA 12 alloy, and it's a blank for a little gear. And there's the die. And again, it's mounted in the tilt machines. Tilted back. And pretty soon after tilting, that slide hammer pulls out the little core. Then the die is opened. This bit's basically just taken straight off the machine, and the casting will then come out quite easily. Made a few of those too, not a large number. This die is cut from an aluminium continuously cast ingot actually, and of course this zinc melts at around 500 C, so it works, that aluminium die does work quite well for that material. But perhaps one of the greatest successes I ever had with tilt casting, if I can get one of these out of here, was the sides for these moulding boxes. I needed to make a lot of boxes, and that means a lot of sides, seeing there's 8 sides for a box. So I cut this die from a couple of large pieces of continuously cast ingot. If I can just get the die open now, of course, the usual problem. Now I mounted this monstrous thing up in one of the tilters, had the pouring basin up here, and we have a little ejector pin mechanism here to tap the die out with, tap the casting out with rather, and here we have a steel core that makes the gap between here. Now, by virtue of these pins being in any of the 3 holes and being mated with any of these 3, I could move this sort of from there to there to there to there, to move this down so that it remained in the centre of the side I eventually made. So here it's much closer to the end, and here it's much further from the end, and in this way I made different length sides. I think I actually made 3 different lengths. Here's the longer one, the longer one there, and oops, a daisy. So we've got the longer, the medium and the shorter one, and they were all actually cast the same lengths, but I simply chopped the end off and remelted it to get the boxes this way. But each one wound up with the pin lugs here in the middle of the eventual side, which is where you need them. As I say, this die is aluminium, and I'm casting aluminium into it. So I did have a little bit of trouble up here. It tended to sort of wear and grab the die a bit, but it did quite well. I think I cast some 160 of these sides in 1 or 2 days, whereas it would have taken me forever if I'd done them one at a time in sand. Believe me, it would have taken a long while. Here's another job that we did do in the tilt machines. It made a blank like that. Again, it was for a gear, and again it was in the ESDA 12 zinc alloy. So again, the die is actually made out of various pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4 of continuously cast ingot, just aluminium ingot, just simply bolted together. It has a core piece. The core piece I also cast. It's actually in bronze, and it seems to have worked fairly well. And there's a bronze insert in here to hold the form a guide for the core that won't wear as the aluminium would if it was something sliding on it. In addition, the junction of this core guide with the die around here will have a very small gap that will let air out to make certain that the sharp edge of the casting forms properly. And again, you know, it was just done with a tilt basin bolted on there in the machines and tilted back. Didn't make many of them, but it did work reasonably well. But with the tilt casting machines like these, you are a little limited. You can have a core and you can have an ejector pin, but you can't really have too many bits of dies being pulled in all sorts of directions with cylinders. It's just not possible. So it is a little limited.